He just wanted to get home before his daughter's fever got worse. But guided by haste and the rain, he entered the wrong room and came across the man who could change everything. What started as a mistake became a brutal test. How far can someone go to save a loved one without losing their own soul? Chapter 1. The rain that October night in New York City seemed to want to wash away not just the streets of the elegant Upper West Side, but also the sorrows that each soul silently carried. Hope Miller walked hurriedly through the carpeted hallways of the Plaza Hotel, her steps light yet weary from someone who had worked beyond their strength and still needed to race against time to get home and care for her feverish little daughter. At 25, Hope had that serene beauty that only women who have learned to be strong out of necessity possess. Her fair skin contrasted with her dark brown hair, which she always kept in a neat bun, and her green eyes, the color of sapphires from Montana, reflected an unbreakable sweetness, despite all the difficulties she had faced. That night, however, those eyes shone with the contained tears of exhaustion and desperation. Her trembling hands held the master keys as she headed toward what she believed was room 1247, where she was supposed to do the last check of the night. Sophia, her 7-year-old daughter, had woken up that morning with a high fever, and the doctor at the public clinic had been clear. She needed specialized tests that cost more than Hope could afford with her maid's salary. The noise of the wind and the constant drumming of the rain against the building's windows confused her. The golden numbers on the doors seemed to dance before her tired eyes, and when she finally stopped in front of what she thought was the correct room, she inserted the key without double-checking the number. The door opened silently, and Hope entered with the cleaning cart, expecting to find an empty room like all the others, but what her eyes found left her paralyzed in the doorway. In front of the panoramic window that offered a spectacular view of Central Park West, illuminated by the nightlights, a man stood with his back to her. Tall, with an athletic build, he wore a perfectly cut black suit that betrayed his economic power. His brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly, and when he turned at the sound of the door, Hope could see blue eyes as deep as the Pacific Ocean in Malibu. Alexander Stone Campbell, at 32, was one of the most influential businessmen in the country. Heir to a real estate empire and owner of a fortune that placed him among the richest men in the nation, he was used to everything and everyone bending to his presence. But at that moment, looking at that green-eyed woman who watched him with a mixture of surprise and panic, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine curiosity. "I'm sorry, sir," Hope murmured with a trembling voice, taking a step back. I thought this room was unoccupied. I'm so sorry." Alexander studied her in silence for a moment that felt eternal. There was something in the way she held her head high, despite her evident nervousness. Something in the way her hands clung to her uniform as if it were her only armor that deeply intrigued him. "Are you all right?" he asked her in a voice softer than he usually used, noticing the dark circles under her eyes and the slight trembling of her lips. "You seem worried." Hope blinked, surprised by the question. In all her years working at the hotel, no guest had ever bothered to ask about her well-being. I'm fine, sir. It was just a mistake. I'll leave immediately." But when she turned to leave, her legs, weakened by fatigue and emotional tension, betrayed her. She had to lean on the doorframe to keep from falling, and it was then that the tears she had held back all day finally escaped. "My daughter is sick." The words came out of her lips before she could stop them, as if the unexpected kindness of that stranger had broken the barriers she kept around her heart. "She has a high fever and needs medical studies that I can't afford. I'm working a double shift, but it's still not enough. I don't know what else to do." Alexander felt something strange in his chest upon hearing those words filled with maternal pain. It had been years since he had encountered someone whose worries were so real, so human. His world was full of people who faked problems to get favors, who exaggerated difficulties to get money. But in Hope's eyes, he saw an honesty that completely disarmed him. He approached her slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal that might run away at any moment. "What's your daughter's name?" "Sophia," Hope replied, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand. "She's 7 years old, and she's all I have in this world." Alexander nodded slowly. Something about the name, the child's age, the mother's desperation, touched a sensitive chord inside him that he thought had died along with. No, it wasn't the time for those memories. "Please, sit down," he told her, gesturing to one of the leather sofas in the presidential suite. Hope hesitated. All the hotel rules prohibited staff from sitting in the presence of guests, especially in the rooms, but there was something in that man's gaze that both calmed and unnerved her. I shouldn't, she began to say. The rules can wait, Alexander interrupted with a smile that completely transformed his stern face. My name is Alexander. And you? Hope, she whispered, unable to believe she was having a real conversation with one of the hotel's most important guests. Hope, he repeated, as if he wanted to taste the name on his lips. A beautiful name for a brave woman. She sat on the edge of the sofa, ready to bolt at any moment. I'm not brave, Mr. Alexander. I'm just a desperate mother. Do you know what impresses me most about you? Alexander asked, taking a seat on the opposite sofa, maintaining a respectful distance. The fact that despite going through something so difficult, you're still working, you're still fighting. That's braver than you think. For the first time in months, Hope felt like someone truly saw her, not as the invisible maid who cleaned rooms, but as a person with worth, with dignity, with a story that deserved to be heard. Tell me about Sophia, Alexander asked, and something in his tone made Hope feel safe enough to share. And so, in the middle of the storm raging outside, two completely different worlds began to intertwine. Hope told him about her brilliant daughter, who dreamed of becoming a doctor, about the nights they read stories together by candlelight when there was no money for electricity, about the drawings Sophia made to decorate their small apartment in Greenwich Village. She told him about the girl's father, who had abandoned them when he found out about the pregnancy, about the jobs she had lost for taking time off when Sophia was sick, about the loneliness of being a single mother in a city as big and merciless as New York. Alexander listened in silence, without interrupting, without judging. And when she finished speaking, he told her about the company he had inherited from his father, about the responsibilities he had never asked for, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw him as a walking wallet. He told her about endless meetings, about decisions that affected thousands of employees, about the weight of carrying a last name that opened every door, but also created every barrier. But there was something else, something he didn't tell her, something that showed in the shadow that crossed his eyes when he mentioned the past, a pain that Hope could perceive even if he didn't express it in words. The conversation went on for hours, and when Alexander finally looked at his Rolex, he was surprised to see it was almost 3 in the morning. You should go, he said, not because he wanted her to leave, but because he knew she had a life, a daughter waiting for her. Hope nodded, getting to her feet with slow movements as if waking from a beautiful dream she didn't want to leave. Thank you for listening to me, Mr. Alexander. It's been a long time since anyone— Don't thank me, he interrupted, also standing up. I needed this conversation more than you can imagine, too. They walked toward the door in silence, and when Hope put her hand on the doorknob, Alexander stopped her with a question that would change everything. Hope, if I could solve your daughter's medical problem right now, what would you be willing to do in return? She turned around slowly, her green eyes shining with a mixture of hope and caution. What do you mean? Alexander approached slowly, his blue eyes fixed on hers. I have contacts at the best private hospitals in the country. I can make sure Sophia receives the best possible medical care. I can pay for all the expenses, all the treatments she needs. Hope's heart raced. It was as if all her prayers had been answered at once. But there was something in his tone, in the way he looked at her, that warned her that nothing in life was free. And what would I have to do? She asked in a barely audible voice. Alexander was silent for a moment, that felt eternal. When he finally spoke, his words fell like stones into the still water of the night. I want you to be mine, completely mine, for 1 year. Could it be that her daughter's salvation came wrapped in a proposal that could cost her her soul? What would you do if the love of your life depended on a sacrifice that could destroy you inside? Chapter 2. Alexander's words hung in the air like an echo bouncing off the walls of the luxurious suite. Hope felt as if the ground was moving under her feet, as if the whole world had stopped in that instant, where time didn't exist, and there were only her, him, and that proposal that sounded like an offer from the devil himself. What does that mean exactly? She asked with a trembling voice, although in the depths of her heart she already knew the answer. Alexander walked away toward the window, where the city lights looked like fallen stars on the wet pavement. It means that for 1 year you would be my companion. You would live in my house, accompany me to social events, business dinners, and trips. You would be my woman, in every sense of the word. Your mistress? The word came from Hope's lips like a sharp dagger. My partner, he corrected, turning to look at her. There would be respect, care. I'm not a cruel man, Hope, but I need you to understand that it wouldn't be a conventional relationship. It would be an arrangement. Hope felt as if she had been slapped. Everything she had felt during those hours of conversation, that inexplicable connection, That sense of having found someone who truly saw her collapsed like a house of cards. "An arrangement?" she repeated, and her voice sounded colder than she had intended. "Like a business transaction?" "Like a solution that benefits both of us," Alexander replied, and although his tone was firm, something in his eyes betrayed that the conversation was not as easy for him as he pretended. "You get the medical security for your daughter and the financial stability you need. I get—" "What do you get?" Hope interrupted him, taking a step toward him. "A new toy? Another conquest for your collection?" Alexander's mask of coldness cracked for a moment, and Hope could see something resembling pain in his blue eyes. "I get real companionship. Someone who isn't with me for my money but by choice. Someone who doesn't fake feelings they don't have." "But that's exactly what you're asking me to do," she retorted, feeling anger beginning to bubble in her chest. "To pretend to be something I'm not. To pretend to feel something I don't." "Are you sure you'd have to pretend?" he asked softly, and there was something in that question that made Hope's heart skip a beat. She stared at him, trying to decipher what was behind those words. During the hours they had spent talking, she had felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being seen, understood, valued. But now, with that proposal on the table, everything felt contaminated. "I can't," she finally whispered. "I can't sell my dignity no matter how much I need the money." Alexander nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting that answer. "I understand. It was just a proposal." Hope headed toward the door with firm steps, but when she put her hand on the doorknob, his words stopped her once more. "The offer will be available for 1 week if you change your mind." "I'm not going to change my mind," she told him without turning around. "Room 2010. Ask for Alexander Campbell." Hope left the suite without looking back, but the tears running down her cheeks were not just of anger, but also of a disappointment that cut through her like a knife. For a moment, just for a moment, she had believed she had found something real. The next 3 days were the longest of Hope's life. Sophia's fever wouldn't break, and every night the little girl was delirious, calling for her mum with a voice that was getting weaker. The doctors at the public clinic had been clear. Without the specialized studies, they couldn't determine what was causing the girl's illness. "Mommy, am I going to die?" Sophia asked one night, her huge brown eyes shining with fever. "No, my love," Hope replied, hugging her close to her chest. "Mommy is going to find a way to make you well, I promise." But as she said those words, she knew she was making a promise she might not be able to keep. She had asked everyone she knew for loans. She had sold everything of value she owned. She had worked double shifts until she was exhausted, and it still wasn't enough. That night, after Sophia finally fell asleep, Hope sat in the small living room of her apartment and cried like she hadn't since she was a child. She cried from helplessness, from injustice, from the terrible decision she knew she would have to make. On the 4th day, Sophia had a seizure that sent her straight to the hospital. The doctors stabilized her, but their words were like a death sentence. "We need to do the studies immediately. Her condition is worsening." "How much do they cost?" Hope asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Between the studies, the specialized consultations and the possible treatment, we're talking about approximately $20,000, and that's just to start. $20,000. An amount that for Hope was as unattainable as the stars. That night, as she watched over her daughter's restless sleep in the hospital bed, she made a decision she knew would change her life forever. The next day, after making sure Sophia was stable and being cared for by her neighbor Marianne, Hope went to the Plaza Hotel. Her uniform was perfectly ironed, her hair pulled back in its usual bun, but her hands trembled slightly when she asked the reception to speak with Mr. Alexander Campbell in room 2010. "For your name, miss?" the receptionist asked with that professional smile Hope knew so well. "Hope Miller, he's expecting me." 5 minutes later, she was standing in front of the door to room 2010. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment and knocked. Alexander opened the door almost immediately, as if he had been waiting. His blue eyes scanned her from head to toe, but not with lust, but with something that seemed like relief, mixed with worry. "How is Sophia?" was the first thing he asked. The question surprised her. She had expected a "I knew you'd come," or some triumphant comment, not a genuine question about her daughter's well-being. "In the hospital," she replied with a hoarse voice. "Yesterday she had a seizure. The doctors say she needs the studies immediately." Alexander stepped aside to let her in. The room was different from the presidential suite, smaller, but just as elegant. Hope stood by the door like a soldier awaiting orders. "Please sit down," he told her, gesturing to a chair by the window. "I'd prefer to stand," she replied. She needed to maintain a certain formality, a certain distance, to be able to say what she had come to say. Alexander nodded, respecting her decision. "Have you come to I accept, the words came out of her lips like an exhale. I accept your proposal. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander looked at her for a long time, and Hope could see there was something in his eyes she didn't know how to interpret. Sadness, regret. Are you sure? He finally asked. My daughter is dying, she replied, and her voice didn't tremble at all. I would do anything to save her. Anything. Alexander approached slowly, until he was about a yard away from her. Hope, I want you to understand that once we sign the agreement, there will be no turning back. A full year, I understand. And I want you to know that this isn't something I do habitually. I'm not a man who buys companionship. Hope looked him in the eyes for the first time since she had entered. Then why are you doing it now? The question hung in the air like a butterfly looking for a place to land. Alexander was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded different, more vulnerable. Because when I met you, when we talked that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. And I'm not talking about physical desire. I'm talking about a real connection. And I know this is wrong. I know the circumstances are wrong, but I can't let you go without trying. Trying what? Hope asked. And for the first time since she had entered, her voice sounded curious instead of resigned, trying to see if what I felt that night was real, if it could become something more. Alexander's words completely disarmed her. It wasn't what she had expected to hear. She had come prepared for a cold business deal, for an emotionless arrangement, not for a confession that sounded dangerously close to hope. And what if it's not? She asked in a low voice. What if at the end of the year we discover there's nothing there? Then I'll let you go with a clear conscience that I tried, he replied, and you'll have the assurance that Sophia will be fine, no matter what happens between us. Hope felt as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump without knowing if there was water or rocks at the bottom. But when she thought of her daughter's feverish eyes, of her little hands burning with temperature, she knew she would jump 1,000 times if necessary. When do we start? She asked. The smile that appeared on Alexander's face was the most beautiful and the saddest Hope had ever seen. But neither of them knew that on the other side of the city, in a mansion in Bel Air, someone else had been following Alexander Campbell's movements very closely. Someone who would not allow a simple maid to ruin the plans she had been weaving in the shadows for years. Chapter 3. The contract that Alexander placed on the glass table in his room was a 15-page document written in small print and legal terms that made Hope dizzy. As she tried to understand the clauses, he watched her with an expression that mixed determination with something that seemed dangerously close to regret. You don't need to read it all now, he said softly. My lawyer can explain each point to you if you wish. No, Hope replied, slowly turning the pages. I want to understand exactly what I'm getting into. The clauses were surprisingly detailed and, to her surprise, protective. The contract stipulated that she would receive a fully furnished house in Greenwich Village so Sophia could live comfortably, full medical care for both of them during the year, and an additional 5 years, a monthly salary equivalent to 10 times what she earned as a maid, and a lump sum at the end of the year that would allow her to secure her daughter's future. Why so many protections for me? She asked, looking up from the document. This seems more beneficial to me than to you. Alexander sat on the sofa opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance. Because I want this to work, Hope, and for it to work, you need to feel safe, protected. I don't want you to be with me out of desperation, but by choice. But I'm here out of desperation, she reminded him, her voice showing no bitterness, just raw honesty. You are now, he admitted, but I hope that over time, that changes. Hope continued reading, and when she reached the cohabitation clauses, she felt herself blush. The contract specified that they would share a residence, that she would accompany him to social and professional events, and that the relationship would include consensual physical intimacy. But it also stipulated that she had the right to refuse without consequences, that there would be no violence of any kind, and that any transgression on his part would lead to the immediate termination of the contract with all compensation intact. This is very protective of me, she murmured, looking at the termination clauses. I want you to trust me, Alexander said simply, and trust is built with actions, not words. When she finished reading, Hope left the document on the table and looked at Alexander. There's something I don't understand. You're a powerful, attractive, rich man. You could have any woman you wanted. Why this? Why me? The question seemed to hit Alexander like an unexpected wave. He got up and walked to the window, where the lights of Rodeo Drive were beginning to turn on with the arrival of dusk. Have you ever been so lonely that the silence becomes a deafening noise? He asked without turning around. I've spent the last 5 years surrounded by people who see me only as an opportunity. Women who pretended to love me for my money, partners who faked loyalty for convenience, friends who pretended affection for the benefits they could get. He turned slowly, and Hope could see a vulnerability in his eyes that surprised her. That night when you entered my room by mistake was the first time in years that someone spoke to me without knowing who I was, without wanting something from me. It was the first time someone saw me just as a man. But now I do want something from you, Hope reminded him. I want you to save my daughter. Yes, he nodded, but your honesty about that is refreshing. You're not pretending to love me to get it. You're not manipulating my feelings. You're being direct about what you need, and that's more real than any declaration of love I've ever heard. Hope felt something strange in her chest upon hearing those words. There was something profoundly sad in the idea that a man with so much economic power was so hungry for human authenticity. And what if at the end of the year I discover that I can't love you? She asked in a low voice. Then I will have given myself an opportunity I didn't have before, he replied. And I will have helped a girl have the life she deserves. It's not a loss in any scenario. Hope took the pen he offered her and held it over the document. For a moment, she hesitated. Once she signed, there would be no turning back. Her life, as she knew it, would end. My daughter, she said suddenly. She'll have to know something. I can't just disappear from her life. I've told her that I got a job as a personal assistant that requires me to travel frequently, Alexander replied. You can see her every day if you wish. The house I've prepared for her is only 20 minutes from where we'll live. The answer surprised her. She had thought about it, had considered how to explain the changes to Sophia, but he had anticipated her worries. You've thought of everything, haven't you? She asked with a smile she didn't know if it was of admiration or resignation. I've had several days to plan, he admitted. I hoped you would come. Hope signed the document with a steady hand. The moment the ink touched the paper, she felt as if she had closed the door to her old life and opened another to a completely unknown territory. When do we start? She asked, leaving the pen on the table. Now, Alexander replied, and there was something in his voice that made her look up in surprise. Now. Sophia is going to be transferred to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center within an hour, he said, checking his watch. Dr. Thomas Peterson, one of the best pediatric infectious disease specialists in the country, will be waiting for her. All the studies will begin tonight. Hope felt as if the air had left her lungs. How? You already arranged all that? I made some calls after you left yesterday, he admitted. Regardless of whether you accepted my proposal or not, I was going to make sure Sophia received the care she needs. Tears welled up in Hope's eyes before she could stop them. Why would you do that? Because a 7-year-old girl shouldn't suffer because of adults' decisions, he simply replied. And because I think if I had had the opportunity to know her, I would have liked to be her friend. At that moment, something fundamentally changed in the way Hope saw Alexander. He wasn't just the powerful man who had made a scandalous proposal. He was someone capable of genuine kindness, someone who had put the well-being of an unknown girl above his own interests. Let's go, he told her, extending his hand. Let's go see your daughter. Hope took his hand, and when their fingers intertwined, she felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. It was as if, for the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't completely alone. Chapter 4. The following days passed in a whirlwind of changes that Hope could barely process. Sophia was responding wonderfully to the treatment at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The studies had revealed a complex but completely treatable bacterial infection, and for the first time in months, Hope could sleep peacefully, knowing that her daughter would be fine. The house Alexander had prepared for them in Greenwich Village was a dream come true. 3 bedrooms, a small but beautiful garden, and a kitchen that looked like it was from a magazine. Sophia had run all over the house the day she left the hospital, screaming with excitement upon discovering that she had her own room with a bed that looked like a princess's and toys she had never dreamed of owning. Are we really going to live here, Mummy? She had asked with huge, incredulous eyes. Yes, my love, it's our home now, Hope had replied, although the words felt strange in her mouth. None of this felt completely hers. Alexander had been meticulous in respecting the terms of their agreement. During the first week, he would visit her every afternoon, always after Sophia had gone to sleep, to gradually get her used to her new routine, as he had explained it. They would talk in the living room. He would tell her about his day at the company. She would talk about Sophia's progress, and slowly, very slowly, they began to get to know each other beyond that first desperate night. Hope discovered that Alexander had a genuine and warm laugh when he relaxed, that he was a voracious reader of American history books, and that he had a complicated relationship with his family. She also noticed that there were certain topics he carefully avoided. his childhood, his past relationships, and any mention of children. It was in the second week when things began to change more significantly. "Tomorrow there's a gala dinner at the Four Seasons Hotel," Alexander told her one night as they were drinking coffee on the house's patio. "It's a fundraiser for the children's hospital. I would like you to accompany me." Hope felt a knot in her stomach. She had known this moment would come, but talking about it in theory was very different from facing it in reality. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear," she said, although she knew that wasn't really the reason for her nervousness. "There's a dress in your closet," he replied softly. "Navy blue by Ralph Lauren. I thought it would bring out your eyes." The idea that he had thought about what color dress would bring out her eyes made something stir in Hope's chest. It wasn't just the practical gesture of making sure she had appropriate clothes. It was the personal attention, the intimate detail that suggested he really saw her. "Alexander," she said slowly, "what are you going to tell people about who I am?" He looked at her over his coffee cup, and she could see he had been expecting that question. "That you're an extraordinary woman who has captured my attention," he finally replied. "It's not a lie, but it's not the whole truth either. The complete truth is rarely appropriate for gala dinners," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Are you worried about anything specific?" Hope got up and walked toward the patio railing, looking at the city lights that stretched toward the horizon. "I'm worried about not fitting in, about doing something that embarrasses you, about them realizing that you're a much better person than all of them put together," he interrupted, coming to stand by her side. The phrase caught her by surprise. "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true." Alexander turned to her, and in the golden light of the patio lamps, his blue eyes seemed more intense. "Hope, those people were born with privileges they never had to earn. You have fought for every good thing in your life. Who do you think has more real value?" Before she could answer, Alexander's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. "Excuse me, I have to take this," he said, walking to the other end of the patio. "Hello? No. I told you I didn't want to talk to her." "I understand, but my answer is still no. Because what happened 5 years ago can't be changed, Teresa." Hope couldn't help but hear fragments of the conversation. Alexander's voice had become cold, distant, and there was a tension in his posture she hadn't seen before. "If she calls again, tell her that if she really wants to talk to me, she can do it through the lawyers," he finally said before hanging up. When he returned, Hope noticed that something had changed in him. The warmth that had been present all night had vanished, replaced by that mask of control she had seen the first night. "Is everything all right?" she asked cautiously. "Perfectly," he replied, but his smile was forced. "Where were we?" "Alexander," she said softly, "if there's something bothering you—" "There's nothing you need to worry about," he interrupted, but his tone had regained that formality that had been absent for the last few weeks. Hope felt as if a door had closed between them. Whoever Teresa was, and whatever had happened 5 years ago, it was something he wasn't willing to share. And that realization painfully reminded her that despite all the intimate conversations and moments of apparent closeness, she really didn't know this man at all. The night of the gala arrived sooner than Hope had expected. The navy blue dress was a work of art. It fit her figure perfectly, and it did indeed bring out her green eyes. When she looked in the mirror, for a moment she didn't recognize herself. She looked like a different woman, a woman who belonged to the world she was about to enter. Alexander arrived to pick her up at 7 on the dot, dressed in a black tuxedo that made him look devastatingly handsome. When he saw her come down the stairs, he stood motionless for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was slightly hoarse. "You look beautiful," he simply said. "The dress is beautiful," she corrected. "I'm just the one wearing it." "No," he said, approaching her until he was standing in front of her. "The dress is just fabric. You're the one who makes it beautiful." The ride to the Four Seasons was silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Alexander occasionally pointed out buildings or places of interest, telling her stories about Los Angeles that made her see the city with new eyes. But Hope noticed that he seemed tense, as if he were preparing for a battle. "Is there anything I should know about tonight?" she asked when they pulled into the hotel's parking lot. Alexander turned off the engine and faced her. "You're going to meet people who have been in my life for years. Some of them are going to be curious about you. Others are going to be less friendly. I want you to know that you don't have to impress anyone but me, and you've already done that. And what if they say something cruel? Then they'll realize they gravely underestimated both your strength and my protection of you," he replied, and there was something in his tone that told her he wasn't joking. The gala ballroom at the Four Seasons was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers, exotic flowers in gigantic arrangements, and tables decorated with linens that probably cost more than Hope's previous monthly salary. The guests were exactly what she had expected. Women with jewelry worth fortunes, and men with watches that cost more than houses. Alexander guided her through the ballroom with a protective hand on her lower back, introducing her to business partners, politicians, and members of Los Angeles high society. Hope surprised herself by conversing naturally, asking intelligent questions about the charity work, and discovering that her experience as a mother gave her a unique perspective on the problems of children's hospitals. It was as they were heading toward their table that everything changed. "Alexander Campbell," a female voice said from behind them. "What a surprise to see you here." Hope felt Alexander tense up immediately. When they turned, she saw a stunning woman, tall, blonde, with eyes the color of ice and dressed in a red dress that probably cost more than Hope's car. She was the kind of woman who dominated any room she entered, and the way she looked at Alexander suggested a shared history. "Teresa," Alexander said with a cold voice, "I didn't know you were going to be here." "Oh, didn't your assistant tell you?" Teresa replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm the new president of the fundraising committee, a position that, incidentally, allows me to decide who gets invitations to these events." Teresa's eyes landed on Hope with an evaluation that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. "And you must be Alexander's companion," she said, loading the word companion with a meaning that made Hope feel as if she had been slapped. "This is Hope Miller," Alexander said, and his voice sounded dangerous. "And she's much more than my companion." "Oh, I'm sure she is," Teresa replied with a poisonous smile. After all, Alexander has always had a weakness for charity cases. The insult was like a slap, but before Hope could respond, Alexander stepped forward. "Teresa," he said with a deadly voice, "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." "Or what?" Teresa retorted, and her mask of sophistication cracked slightly. "Are you going to ruin my reputation like you ruined my life 5 years ago?" "You ruined your own life," Alexander replied. "I just refused to be a part of it." Teresa moved closer, and Hope could see real tears in her eyes, although her smile never wavered. "Do you know what the saddest thing is, Alexander? That after all this time, you're still punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. And now you're dragging this poor girl into your self-destruction." "What are you two talking about?" Hope asked, looking between them. Teresa looked at her with something that might have been compassion if it hadn't been mixed with so much malice. "Hasn't he told you about Isabel?" she asked. "About his daughter?" Hope's world stopped. In the periphery of her vision, she could see that several people had begun to pay attention to the conversation, but all that vanished when she saw the expression on Alexander's face. "Teresa, stop!" he said, and for the first time since she had known him, Hope heard a plea in his voice. "She was beautiful," Teresa continued, ignoring the warning. "Dark hair, eyes like yours. She was 7 years old when—" "Stop!" Alexander yelled, and the sound cut through the music and conversations within a radius of several feet. Hope looked at him, seeing the raw desperation in his eyes, and suddenly all the pieces began to fit. His reaction to meeting Sophia, his inexplicable generosity, the way he sometimes looked at her as if he were seeing ghosts. "You had a daughter," she whispered, and it wasn't a question. Alexander's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a pain so deep it took her breath away. "Hope," he began, but she was already backing away. "You had a 7-year-old daughter," she repeated, and her voice sounded distant, even to her own ears. "Like Sophia. I can explain." But Hope wasn't listening anymore. She turned and ran toward the exit, pushing through the crowd of curious guests, ignoring the murmurs and stares. She had to get out of there. She had to be away from him, away from the lies, away from the terrible realization that maybe she had never been more than a substitute for something he had lost. Chapter 5. Hope ran through the streets of Beverly Hills aimlessly, her heels clattering against the pavement wet from the night drizzle that had begun to fall. The navy blue dress, which a few hours earlier had made her feel like a princess, now stuck uncomfortably to her skin as tears ran down her cheeks uncontrollably. She didn't know how long she had been walking when she finally stopped in a small park, collapsing on a bench under a street lamp that flickered faintly. Her phone had rung 20 times with calls from Alexander, but she didn't have the strength or desire to answer. "A substitute," she murmured to the empty night. "Is that what Sophia and I are? A replacement for what he lost?" The idea cut through her like a knife. She replayed every conversation, every gesture, every moment of tenderness she had begun to believe was real. Had it all been a projection? When he looked at Sophia, was he seeing another girl? When he touched her, was he touching the ghost of another woman? The sound of footsteps on the damp grass made her look up. Alexander was approaching slowly, his hands in his pants pockets, his tuxedo wrinkled and his hair disheveled as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly. "How did you find me?" she asked, without the energy to be truly angry. "I've been following you for an hour," he admitted, stopping a few feet away. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." "How considerate," she said bitterly. "Taking care of your investment." The phrase seemed to hit him physically. "Hope, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" She stood up, facing him with a rage that surprised her with its intensity. "Explain that you've been using me as therapy for your pain. Explain that my daughter is just a convenient reminder of yours." "It's not like that," he shouted, and his control finally broke. "It's not like that at all." "Then what is it?" she yelled back. "Tell me what it is, Alexander. Tell me the truth for once." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded torn. "Her name was Isabel," he began, and each word seemed to cost him a physical effort. "She was my daughter. She was 7 years old, with brown hair like mine, curious eyes that asked 1,000 questions a minute. She liked to paint, she hated vegetables, and she had a laugh that could light up a room." Hope felt as if something was being torn in her chest as she listened to the raw love in his voice. "Her mother was Teresa," he continued, vaguely gesturing toward the hotel they had come from. "We married young, when I still believed that money could buy happiness. It was an arranged marriage by our families, convenient for business. But Isabel was real. She was mine." He stopped in front of a tree, leaning a hand against the trunk as if he needed to hold himself up. "Teresa never really wanted to be a mother. After Isabel was born, she plunged into parties, trips, anything that would keep her away from responsibilities. I worked too much, trying to build the empire I had inherited, thinking that if I earned enough money, I could make up for the lack of maternal attention." "What happened?" Hope asked in a low voice, although part of her didn't want to know the answer. Alexander's eyes filled with tears that he refused to let fall. "One Saturday morning, 5 years ago, I had an important meeting. Teresa had a hangover from a party the night before. Isabel wanted to go to the park, but we both told her to wait. She was so independent, so smart. She thought she could go alone." His voice broke, and Hope had to resist the urge to go comfort him. "She never made it to the park. A drunk driver ran a red light and—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Hope felt as if her heart had been ripped from her chest. "Alexander, she died in the hospital 2 days later," he continued, and now tears ran freely down his face. 2 days in which we both blamed each other, screamed at each other, and destroyed each other. When she died, our marriage died with her. Teresa went to Europe. I immersed myself in work until I became a machine. For 5 years I felt nothing, nothing." He turned to her, and Hope could see the agony he had been carrying all these years. "Until you walked into my room that night," he said softly. "Until you spoke of Sophia with so much love, with so much desperation to protect her. For the first time in 5 years I remembered what it felt like to be truly alive." "And that's why you looked for me?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "That's why you made this proposal, to remember?" "At first, maybe," he admitted, and the honesty of the reply hit her like a slap. "But not in the way you think. I wasn't looking to replace Isabel. I was looking for forgiveness." "Forgiveness?" "Forgiveness for not having been there when she needed me. Forgiveness for having put work before her. Forgiveness for not having been the father she deserved." His voice broke completely. "I thought that if I could save Sophia, if I could protect a mother who would do anything for her daughter, maybe I could find something similar to redemption." Hope sat heavily on the bench, the weight of his words crushing her. "And what am I in all this?" she asked in a low voice. "Just a means for your redemption." Alexander approached slowly, kneeling in front of her until his eyes were at the same level. "At first, yes," he said, and the brutal honesty of the answer was like a knife. "But that changed much earlier than I expected. It changed when I saw you read stories to Sophia in the hospital. It changed when you laughed at my terrible jokes on the patio. It changed when you defended a nurse who was being mistreated by an arrogant doctor." He took her hands in his, and Hope didn't pull them away. "It changed when I realized that I wasn't getting to know you to heal my pain, but because you yourself are extraordinary, because you're brave and kind and real in a way I had never known." "How can I believe that?" she whispered. "How can I know that it's not just what you need to hear?" "Because I'm willing to give up everything to prove it to you," he replied without hesitation. "The contract, the money, the full year, everything. If that's what you need to believe this is real, I'll do it right now." Hope looked into his eyes, looking for signs of a lie, of manipulation, but all she saw was raw vulnerability and a love that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. "And Sophia?" she asked. "How do you really feel about her?" The question seemed to completely disarm him. He sat on the ground in front of her, not caring about his expensive suit. "I love your daughter," he simply said. I love her because she's bright and curious and has a capacity for joy that reminds me why life is worth living. I love her because she's yours, because she has your eyes and your smile. And yes, I love her because she allows me to remember that I was a father once, that not everything I touched was destroyed. He wiped the tears from his cheeks with the back of his hand. But I don't love her as a substitute for Isabel. I love both of them because each one is unique, because each one has given me something different. Isabel taught me what it was to be a father. Sophia is teaching me that I can be one again. Hope felt as if her heart was being torn apart and repaired at the same time. His honesty was devastating, but also liberating. There was no pretense, no comfortable lies, just the raw and painful truth of a man who had lost everything and was trying to rebuild himself. I don't know if I can do this, she finally whispered. I don't know if I can be with someone who is healing from something so profound. I'm not asking you to heal me, he said softly. I'm asking you to allow me to love you while I heal, to allow me to build something new with you, not on the ruins of what I lost, but alongside them. Hope closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision in front of her. When she opened them, he was still there, waiting, not pressuring. Teresa said you're dragging me into your self-destruction, she finally said. Teresa is bitter because after Isabel, I realized I had never truly loved her, he replied. And she's jealous because you make me feel things I never felt for her, even when we were married. And what if this is just the novelty? What if in 6 months you realize you can't be with someone who reminds you of your loss? Alexander stood up slowly, extending his hand to her. Then I promise I'll let you go with honor, with everything you need to start a new life. But I also promise you this. What I feel for you has nothing to do with Isabel and everything to do with the extraordinary woman you are. Hope looked at his outstretched hand, knowing that if she took it, she would be choosing to believe in something that could either destroy her or save her. What really happened at that gala after I left? She asked. A sad smile crossed Alexander's face. I told Teresa in front of all those people that you were the bravest woman I had ever met, and that if she couldn't respect that, then she didn't deserve to be in the same room as you. Then I came to look for you. And your social reputation? I don't care about my social reputation, he said firmly. I care about you. Hope took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in it. When she stood up, he hugged her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Does this mean you're going to give me a real chance? He murmured against her hair. It means I'm going to try to believe, she whispered back. But I need time, and I need complete honesty. No more secrets. No more secrets, he promised. But as they walked back to the car together, neither of them knew that Teresa had been watching from a distance and that the public humiliation of that night had only been the beginning of her revenge plan. Chapter 6. The following weeks passed in a kind of delicate dance between Hope and Alexander. She had decided to officially move into the house he had prepared for them in Bel Air, a mansion that combined modern elegance with traditional American touches that made it feel less intimidating than she had expected. Sophia had adapted to her new life with the ease of children, delighting in the huge garden where she could run, the pool where Alexander had taught her to swim with infinite patience, and especially with the stories he read to her every night before bed. Seeing this powerful man sitting in a tiny chair, making funny voices for the characters in the books, had become Hope's favorite moment of the day. Why is Mr. Alexander living in our house? Sophia had asked one morning while they were having breakfast on the patio. Because he's special to Mommy, Hope had replied, trying to find the right words. Like a daddy? The girl had asked with that brutal directness of a 7-year-old. Hope had looked to where Alexander was swimming in the pool, his long, powerful strokes cutting through the crystal-clear water, and she had felt something in her chest that she didn't know how to name. Maybe, she had whispered, maybe something like that. But the peace of those weeks was disturbed when Alexander came home one night with a tense expression that Hope had learned to recognize as trouble. What happened? She asked him immediately, after Sophia had gone to sleep. Teresa is moving pieces, he said, pouring himself a whiskey with hands that trembled slightly. She's been talking to members of the company's board of directors, insinuating that I'm not in an emotional state to run the business. Can she do that? She can try, he replied bitterly. Her family still holds a significant percentage of the company's shares. If she convinces enough board members that I'm emotionally compromised, they could vote for my removal. Hope felt as if the ground were moving under her feet. And if that happens, we'd lose everything, he said simply. The house, the money, Sophia's medical security, everything. That night, Hope could barely sleep. She stayed awake listening to Sophia's quiet breathing in the next room, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by allowing her life to to become so completely intertwined with Alexander's? The answer came 3 days later, in the form of a legal summons delivered directly to their door. Teresa is suing for shared custody of Sophia, Alexander's lawyer explained during an emergency meeting in his office. She's alleging that you are living in an immoral situation that puts the minor's well-being at risk. Custody of what? Hope yelled, standing up so abruptly that she knocked over her chair. She has no right to my daughter. She's alleging that as Alexander's former wife, and given that he has assumed a paternal role with the child, she has the right to intervene in her well-being, the lawyer explained in a tired voice. It's a weak argument, but plausible enough to cause problems. This is revenge, Alexander said with a deadly voice. Pure revenge for the humiliation at the gala. We know, the lawyer confirmed, but that doesn't make the lawsuit any less problematic. If a judge decides that the cohabitation situation is not appropriate for the minor, they could take Sophia away from me, Hope finished, and the phrase came from her lips like a lament. That night, after Sophia fell asleep, without knowing anything about the legal chaos looming over her life, Hope and Alexander sat on the patio in a silence that felt like the antechamber to a farewell. I have to go, she finally said. No, he replied immediately. We're not going to let her win. It's not about winning or losing, Alexander, Hope said, turning to look at him. It's about my daughter. It's about protecting her from all this. Running away won't protect her, he retorted. It will only teach her that love gives up at the first threat. Love? She repeated, and there was something vulnerable in her voice. Is that what this is about? Alexander got up from his chair and walked until he was in front of her, taking her hands in his. Hope, he said softly, I'm in love with you, completely irrevocably in love. Not as a substitute for anyone, not as therapy for my pain, but as the man I am now, in love with the woman you are. Tears welled up in Hope's eyes before she could stop them. And I'm in love with Sophia as if she were my own daughter, he continued. I want to be there when she loses her first tooth, when she learns to ride a bike, when she has her first heartbreak. I want to be the man who walks her down the aisle the day she gets married. Alexander, and if we have to fight Teresa and everyone else to protect our family, then we'll fight, he said with a fierce determination, but I'm not going to let fear take away our chance to be happy. Hope looked into his eyes, seeing the absolute truth in them, and felt as if something was unleashed in her chest. I love you too, she whispered, and it was the first time she had used his name without formality. I love you, and that terrifies me because I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. You don't have to be strong alone, he told her, kissing her hands. We can be strong together. The legal battle lasted 3 months. 3 months of hearings, of investigators reviewing every aspect of their lives, of sleepless nights and days filled with anxiety. Teresa had hired the best lawyers money could buy and had mounted a media campaign that painted Hope as a gold digger who was exposing her daughter to an immoral situation. But Alexander had something that Teresa had not considered, the truth and people willing to testify for it. The doctors at Cedars-Sinai testified about Hope's dedication to her daughter. The teachers at Sophia's new school talked about how the girl had blossomed since the change. The household staff testified about the genuine love they saw between the family. And when Teresa took the stand to testify, her own words turned against her. How many times have you visited the minor Sophia? Alexander's lawyer asked. I haven't. It hasn't been necessary, Teresa replied with arrogance. Have you called to ask about her well-being? I've been busy with... Have you sent a birthday gift? A Christmas card? Any show of interest in her well-being before filing this lawsuit? Teresa's silence was more eloquent than any answer. When it was finally Hope's turn to testify, she took the stand with the dignity she had learned throughout her life of struggle. Ms. Miller, Teresa's lawyer said, isn't it true that you are living with Mr. Campbell primarily for economic benefit? I am living with Alexander because I love him, she replied clearly, and because he loves my daughter and me in a way we had never experienced before. And don't you think that exposing your daughter to a relationship based on an economic contract is detrimental to her development? Hope looked directly at Teresa before answering. What is detrimental to a child's development is for adults to use her well-being as a weapon in their games of revenge, she said with a firm voice. My daughter is surrounded by love, care, and stability. She has a mother who would do anything to protect her, and a man who loves her as if she were his own. If that is detrimental, then the whole world is confused about what constitutes a family. The verdict came a week later. The judge not only denied Teresa's lawsuit, but ordered her not to approach the family again without a justified cause. That night, when Sophia finally fell asleep after a spontaneous celebration with cake and balloons, Hope and Alexander sat on the patio under the Los Angeles stars. "Do you know what I realized during all this?" Hope said, resting her head on his shoulder. "What?" "That it doesn't matter how we started. It doesn't matter the contract or the circumstances or the mistakes we made. What matters is what we chose to build together." Alexander kissed her gently, and when they separated, she could see tears in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" he asked suddenly. "Not because of a contract, not out of obligation, but because you want to spend the rest of your life with me." "Are you proposing to me in pajamas on our patio after a legal battle?" she asked with a smile. "I'm proposing to you in the place where I knew I loved you, after proving that our family is worth fighting for," he corrected. "Yes," she whispered, and the word came out loaded with all the love she had been holding back. "Yes, I'll marry you." 6 months later, in a small and intimate ceremony in the garden of their house, Hope Miller became Hope Campbell. Sophia was the ring bearer, radiant in a white dress that matched her mother's. When the priest asked them for their vows, Alexander took Hope's hands and spoke from the heart. "Hope, you came into my life like a storm that changed everything. You taught me that love doesn't replace pain, but gives it meaning. You taught me that a family is not defined by blood, but by choice. I promise to love you not as the man I was, but as the man you have helped me become." When it was Hope's turn, her voice was clear and strong. "Alexander, you taught me that I deserve to be loved not just as a mother but as a woman. You taught me that strength doesn't mean being alone, but finding someone who wants to be strong with you. I promise to love you not despite your pain, but including it, because that pain made you the man I fall in love with every day." 5 years later, as she watched Sophia, now 12, teach her little brother, Michael Alexander, to walk, Hope reflected on the path that had led them there. The company had prospered under her and Alexander's shared leadership. They had established a scholarship program in Isabel's memory, which helped underprivileged children access quality education. Teresa had disappeared from their lives. Rumors said she had moved to Spain. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, sitting next to her on the same patio where they had had so many important conversations. "That sometimes the best things in life come disguised as tragedies," she replied, leaning against him. "Do you regret anything?" Hope looked at her children playing in the garden, listened to Sophia's laughter mixing with Michael's babbling, felt Alexander's heart beating against her back, and smiled. "Nothing," she whispered. "I don't regret anything." Because they had learned that true love is not built on perfection, but on the willingness of two people to choose each other again and again, despite the storms, despite the fear, despite everything the world could throw at them. And that choice, renewed every day, had been the most beautiful of their lives. The end.